On February 10th, 2020, at a rally in New Hampshire, President Trump claimed that the virus would disappear with warm weather.
Now, the virus that we're talking about having to do, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat. Because of all we've done, the risk to the American people remains very.
On February 26, 2020, President Trump said at a White House press conference that cases would soon drop to zero.
So we're at the low level. As they get better, we take them off the list, so that we're going to be pretty soon at only 5 people, and we could be at just 1 or 2 people over the next short period of time.
And on February 27th, he said it would disappear.
It's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
But before all this, President Trump did an interview with Bob Woodward on February 7th of 2020 and said something much different, that the virus is airborne and far more deadly than severe flus. During this time, Americans waited in fear as they saw what the government tried to do with a cruise ship with 700 people infected. Now, those of us who understood our globalized world and were maybe a little news obsessed and watched the numbers coming out of China knew exactly what was coming. I was running a small organization at the time and made immediate preparations to go virtual. But most people remained completely oblivious, and the president was not helping. While it's maybe true that he was trying to keep people calm, although he was coming off of his impeachment and really didn't want to deal with another problem, it instead just put half the country in complete denial. And then on March 13th, the day that we all want to forget, but we've got to go through this, Trump declared a national emergency and stopped most travel into the country. 3 days later, the administration released 15 days to slow the spread federal guidelines. This, of course, included advice to stay home and distance, especially if you had underlying health conditions. And then on March 19th, California issues its stay-at-home order because it had the first cases, and the rest of the country followed suit, as the federal government didn't have jurisdiction to do that. And then right away, not a week into this thing, the White House misinformation campaign begins. On March 19th, that same day, 2020, at another White House press briefing, President Trump falsely claimed that the FDA had approved a COVID anti-malarial drug named hydroxychloroquine.
A drug called chloroquine, and some people would add to it hydroxychloroquine. It's a very powerful drug in different forms, and it's shown very encouraging, very, very encouraging early results. And we're going to be able to make that drug available almost immediately, and that's where the FDA has been so great,
calling it a game changer. Then FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn immediately pushed back and said, no, it is not approved. But it was too late for Trump supporters. And then again on that same day, Bob Woodward came out with audio of the interview he had done. And in that audio, Trump says, quote, "I always wanted to play it down. I still like playing it down because I don't want to create a panic." Instead, he just created total confusion. And this continued over the next few weeks. Meanwhile, hospitals were over capacity and people were dying by the thousands. I remember watching one of my family members on a ventilator for months. Thank God he was fortunate enough to survive, but it took years to recover, and most weren't so lucky. And then on April 23rd, Trump has a doozy of a press conference.
Whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. Supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that hasn't been checked, but you're going to test it. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. Disinfectant, where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number on the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors with. But it sounds interesting.
While this is all going on, people are getting antsy and worse in red states. Or I should just say people on the right in any state. On April 15th, thousands of protesters stood outside the Michigan state capitol to protest Whitmer's stay-at-home extension. Trump saw this as an opportunity, of course, and jumped in. On April 17th, he posted a series of tweets saying, quote, Liberate Michigan and liberate Virginia and save your great Second Amendment. It is under siege. Some state-level gun control measures had been passed a few days prior. Remember, school shootings were out of control and still are. Trump supporters heard the call, and as we would find out in the future, that wouldn't be the last time. And on April 30th, armed protesters entered that same state capitol. And then on May 25th, 2020, the world changed once again. George Floyd was murdered on camera by Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. And this sparked nationwide protests like we've never seen. I mean, even Mitt Romney was out there protesting. The energy was just incredible, and it really felt like change was on the horizon. Those of us who were at a protest witnessed how good everyone was at protecting themselves and wearing a mask generally. It was hard to take the distancing advice, so they compromised and stayed outside while wearing a mask. But that's not what the right-wing media showed their viewers. They would go out and find the few images and videos that they could of people that were unmasked and not following the rules, and combined it with images of cities seemingly burning down, even though the property damage and violence was pretty limited to a few places. It seemed like it might go further, but it never did. The right jumped at the opportunity to satisfy their bias and believe those narratives. And we didn't have any help from some of our leaders like Gavin Newsom and Boris Johnson. It was also a campaign year, and Trump just really wanted to get back to his rallies. And he saw these protests as, of course, another opportunity. Holding rallies across the country with no COVID rules whatsoever. They, of course, ended up being super spreader events, even killing one of Trump's apparent friends, Herman Cain. To Trump's credit, when the virus started to flare up again, he switched to outdoor super spreader events with no rules. Now, thankfully, there was actually some good information coming out of the White House. It just wasn't from Trump. It was from Mike Pence and Dr. Anthony Fauci. They did, I think, maybe the best they could to balance out the misinformation that the president was giving. I'd like them to have been more aggressive, but it is what it is. But they did a good enough job to where at least national organizations had some guidance to build on. And big events all over the country, even sports, followed those rules. The one exception was Trump rallies. And then most red states and red counties followed their selfish leader. And because of this, we could never get the virus under control like many other countries did. Guidance had to constantly be adjusted to accommodate the freedom of red states. And this put a lot of pressure on blue states to try to save people, as we're all interconnected and we actually have some empathy. Unfortunately, that resulted us probably keeping schools closed too long. And that wasn't even enough to overcome all that vast selfishness. As a result, when Trump barely left on January 20th, 2021, 400,000 people had died in the United States versus 2 million worldwide. The U.S. only has 4.2% of the world's population, and that's almost 17% of the deaths. Now, of course, that's not entirely accurate because of excess deaths. We're more accurate in counting those things here than they are in much of the rest of the country. There's still undercounts here as well, and so our excess deaths were probably closer to 700,000. In a CDC study that was published for that time, they estimated that 391,000 people would be here that aren't here today because of what Trump did. The right is currently trying to rewrite this history, and a lot of other history for that matter. But those of us that had to deal with the lunacy of the right during that time are not going to let that happen. Dr. Fauci was a calming force in a sea of MAGA mania. I will forever be grateful. Please share this with anyone that you can think of that might need to hear it. Fascism can't win if we protect our history.